Hello, welcome back. Today we're making a little summer spring maxi dress. It is super flowy. It has these little ties in the back. The bodice is lined, and I would say this is very beginner friendly. I'm gonna take you through the whole process of drafting the pattern, cutting the fabric out, and sewing it. We're gonna start by doing everyone's favorite thing and take some basic body measurements. All right, starting with the above bust. This is the circumference of above your bust. Make sure to breathe while you take this measurement. Mine is 35 inches. So let's do a little bit of math. Take the above bust circumference, divide it by 4, and then add ½ an inch for ease. And what is ease? Because this dress isn't skin tight, we need to add ease to most measurements to give them a little bit of wiggle room. So for me, this would be 9¼ inches. Side note, I'm using transparent pattern paper, but you can use wrapping paper or whatever you have on hand. Grab a measuring tape and 2 different colored pens. And we are gonna use this edge of the paper, since it's a completely straight line, as the center front. So we're gonna draw this pattern on the fold. That's gonna make more sense in just a minute. So we're measuring in from that center front. You're gonna mark whatever measurement yours was. Mine was 9¼ inches, and we'll draw a straight line with a ruler. Next, the bust. This is the fullest part of the bust. My bust circumference is 37 inches. So take your bust circumference, again, divide it by 4 and add ½ an inch for ease. For me, that is 9¾ inches. So I'm gonna measure down about 3, maybe 4 inches around the general area the bust would be. And we're gonna measure across from that point. So again, mine was 9¾ inches. Now we need to figure out how long our bodice is gonna be. I think I want mine to be about 7 inches. You can always make it a little longer if you're unsure, but I'm gonna mark down from the neckline and I'm gonna mark 7.5 inches, just to be safe. Now for the waist. This is roughly 2 inches above your belly button. This is also about where the bodice will end and where the skirt will begin. Mine is 32 inches. So now take that waist circumference, divide it by 4, and then add ½ an inch for ease. For me, that's 9½ inches. I'm gonna mark across from where the waist measurement was and mark 9½ inches. And now I'm just gonna connect my lines. So use a ruler, connect your lines. I'm also gonna soften my lines a little bit and make them look a little more natural. Next, we're gonna shape the bodice a little bit around the armpit. As you can tell, the bodice is a little bit higher at the neckline and then it comes down a little bit around the armpit. So I'm just gonna make the armpit about ½ an inch lower and just draw a little curved line to make it look a little more blended. Now, this is a very small detail, but it actually makes a big difference. If you look very closely at the center front of the bodice, it kind of dips in a little bit. And this just helps it more naturally fit the curves of the body. So I'm just gonna slope that center front down like 1/4 of an inch, just a tiny bit. Now we are gonna add a dart. Now hang with me, do not get nervous. It's a lot easier than it seems. So measure in from the center front about 4 inches. This is where our dart will go. And then we're gonna make the dart about 4.5 inches long and draw a straight line. So this is our dart. Now I'm gonna draw little dart legs on each side. And this is just a slanted line, ½ an inch wide on each side of that vertical line. I feel like watching it makes more sense than me explaining it. But just a little note here. I am like a B cup. So I would say if you're an A cup or a B cup, you can do these little ½ an inch dart legs on each side just fine. So your total dart would be 1 inch. But if you have a larger bust, you might want to opt for a wider dart. I think the rule of thumb is like add ½ an inch for the dart per cup size. And our dart is just about done. So eventually it's gonna be pinched in like this. I'm just gonna cut some of the extra paper all around so I can kind of bend the paper a little more. So when we pinch this dart in, I'm gonna put a little tape here so you can really see it. You'll notice that the bottom of the bodice is no longer straight since we've added a dart. And that will look a little bit wonky as we keep going. So we need to take our ruler and give this a straight line with the dart pinched in. Give it a straight line. I'm lining the ruler up with that center front, and that's gonna give me a perfect 90-degree angle, and I'll just draw a straight line. I'm just gonna fill in this little line right here. But if you're like, wait, now the bodice is like an inch longer now that we straightened that line, you are right. And we can trim the bodice later on if we have to. But this ended up being the perfect length for me. And that was the hardest part of the whole drafting process. Now we just have to add our seam allowance. So I'm just gonna go around and add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the bottom, the side, and the top. And now we're done. Make a mark here to remind yourself to cut that on the fold and draw a little F for front bodice and cut it out. Moving on to the back bodice, we do not have to draft anything. Praise the Lord. We just need to pinch this dart in. You can temporarily tape it if that's helpful. And we're just gonna trace this exact shape for the back bodice. The back doesn't need a dart, that's why we pinched it in. And then at the top, I'm just gonna make a little mark where our armpit line is. This is gonna make more sense in a second, but as you can see, the front and the back bodice connect at the side seam, so we only need to make the back bodice as tall as the armpit. This is probably gonna make more sense when I put the two pattern pieces together. This is where they'll eventually be sewn together, so as you can see, the side seams are the same height. Again, making a mark to cut on the fold. I'll draw a little B, and I just noticed it looked a little bit wonky right there, so I'm just blending this line in a little bit better. Now I'm double checking, and it matches up perfect. I'm taking the tape off the front bodice, and now we can cut the back bodice out. Now for the easy parts. I have my fabric folded in half right sides together, and we're just gonna start drafting the skirt pattern directly onto the fabric. So starting with the skirt waist width. This is just our waist circumference divided by 4 times 1.75. This just gives us a little bit extra room to add the gathers later. We also have to add 1/2 inch seam allowance because we're drafting this directly onto the fabric. We can't forget seam allowance. So for me, this is about 15 inches. I'll draw a straight line. And now for the length of the skirt, I'm just figuring out how long I want the skirt. This is always such a feat. So for the skirt length, make this however long you want the skirt to be, plus 1.5 inches for seam allowance. So for me, that's about 40.5 inches. And now for the skirt hem width. This is gonna be however wide you made the waist of the skirt times about 1.5. This is just gonna give us some fullness at the hem. For me, this is exactly how wide the fabric is when it's folded in half, which is about 21 inches. And now we're just gonna draw a gradual slanted line from the waist to the hem. This always takes me a few good tries to get it perfect. I kind of cheated here and I laid down a previous skirt pattern. So lay down a pattern or even a dress or a skirt that you like the shape of, and you can mimic that shape. And now we're gonna cut our skirt pieces out. So we need to cut 2 skirt pieces on the fold. So there's my first one. I'll lay that down onto some fabric and cut an identical piece. We need to cut 2 bodice front pieces on the fold. One of those is for a lining. We need to cut 2 bodice back pieces on the fold. Again, one is a lining. And now we need to draw out some shoulder straps. So we need 2 front straps, which are longer, and 2 back straps, which are shorter. And you can most likely use the same dimensions that I used. So that's 18 inches by 5 inches for the front straps, and 11 inches by 5 inches for the back straps, and cut 2 of each on the fold. And we are done cutting. Now it's time to draw our dart lines onto our fabric. So I'm just using some tailor's chalk, making sure to line the fold of the fabric up with the fold of the pattern. And I'm just gonna trace this line onto my fabric. First, I should have done this earlier. I'm just filling in this line right here all the way to the bottom. This is how I like to trace a dart. I just fold the pattern over with my finger and kind of follow the line with the tailor's chalk, and then I'll straighten it with a ruler. I'll flip it over to the other side. Again, matching up the fold of the fabric to the fold of the pattern. And I don't know why I didn't think of this before. It makes way more sense to just fold the pattern over and draw a line. That was literally the first time I've ever thought to do that, and that's crazy. So now we have our lines drawn. This is optional, but I actually like to draw the dart legs as well because this kind of helps me know exactly where I'm gonna be sewing. So I'm just drawing in my 1/2 inch dart legs and straightening the lines with a ruler. And now I'll go ahead and pinch those darts in on the wrong side of the fabric. As you can see, the wrong side was facing up. and I'm gonna pin along the slanted dart legs. If you've never sewn darts before, this is your dart sewing 101. I'll do the same exact thing for the other side. I'm just pinching the dart in and I'm pinning along the dart legs. And before I sew, I always like to hold the bodice up to myself just to make sure. The rule of thumb for darts is you want the top of the dart to be lower than where your nipple is. I tried to avoid saying that word, but I can't. And as you can tell, mine were way too high. So I need to lower the tops of the darts by about an inch. So don't worry. We're just gonna take the pins out and start the dart about half an inch lower. And now I'm holding it up to myself again, and this looks better. I'm gonna do the same exact thing for the lining piece, because remember we have 2 front bodices, and now we'll go ahead and sew those pinned edges. So I'm starting at the bottom of the dart. I'm gonna start with a back stitch and just follow the lines of my dart legs, removing the pins as I go. And when we get to the very point of the dart, we're just gonna backstitch and then sew right off the fabric. So we have a nice little taper. And now we have a beautiful dart. If that was your first dart, give yourself a pat on the back. We're gonna press those darts so they lay nice and flat and do the same exact thing to the lining piece. Moving on to the shoulder straps. We are gonna fold these right sides together, hot dog style, and press them. I'm doing this for the short straps as well as the longer straps. And this is optional, but I actually think it makes it look really nice with the strap folded in half. I'm just gonna draw a little angled edge. So I'm drawing 2 inches down and then drawing a diagonal line and cutting. This is just gonna give us a little 45-degree angle on the end of each strap. I'll do this for all 4 straps. And now I'll sew down the long edge and down that slanted edge. And if you aren't slanting your edges, just sew down the long edge and then down the short edge. So here we go. We are sewing this at half an inch seam allowance. When I get to the slanted edge, I'm gonna lower the needle into the fabric, lift the presser foot, pivot the fabric, and drop the presser foot and keep sewing. And I'm starting and ending with a back stitch. Again, this is optional, but it kind of helps get rid of some of the bulkiness of the fabric. I'm gonna trim my seam allowance in half, especially right there at the corner. That's where it can get really bulky, so go ahead and trim that. And now take a sharp object. I like a knitting needle. You can use a paintbrush, whatever. Poke it into the closed side. You kind of have to finagle it a little bit to get it started. And then you're just gonna flip this little tube inside out. Take the knitting needle out. And I also have this little purple tool. I got it on Amazon. This helps so much when poking out little corners. It's linked in my Amazon storefront in my bio. This just gives us really crisp corners. And now we'll go ahead and press our shoulder straps. Again, this is optional, but I like to top stitch my straps all around. So I like to go down the long edge, down the slanted edge, and then down the other long edge. Sometimes you need to poke that pointy part through because it gets a little jammed up sometimes. And now these just look so professional. Moving on to the bodice. We're gonna take our 2 bodice fronts and then lay the bodice back pieces right sides together. Line them up at the side seams and pin them. I'll do that to both pieces, lining them up at the side seams and pinning them. And now we'll just sew them down the side seams. We'll do that to both pieces. Again, just to get rid of some of the bulk, I'm going to trim the seam allowance in half. Sometimes the lining and the outer bodice together can create a lot of bulk, so trimming the seam allowance helps a lot. And now we'll go ahead and press those seams that we just sewed. Now I'm doing the unthinkable and trying to figure out where I want to place the straps. To save you the hassle, you can probably use my same measurements. So I'm measuring in from the center front about 3.5 inches. I'm going to make a mark on each side, and that is where I will place the straps. So we're placing the long straps onto the front bodice. I'll place both straps right sides together, flip it around to the back. I'll do the same exact thing for the back bodice. And now we'll go ahead and sew these straps. I'm sewing this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and end. And now our 4 little straps are attached. So we're gonna take the lining of the bodice, flip it wrong side out, making sure the darts are at the bottom facing you. And we're gonna place the other bodice inside the lining so that they're right sides together. Again, make sure the darts are both on the bottom. You don't want one bodice upside down. And we're gonna pin it along the neckline. Make sure you're lining up the side seam of the bodice to the side seam of the lining. Put a pin there, and then I'm just gonna pin it all around. Again, making sure the other side seam of the bodice matches up with the side seam of the lining. And once it's all pinned, we'll sew it all around. We'll sew this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And while you're doing this, just make sure the straps are out of the way and that they're facing down. You don't want the straps to be caught up in this while you're sewing. Also, I'm just kind of reaching in and making sure both layers are laying nice and flat as I'm sewing this. Once we get to the end, we'll end with a back stitch. Again, this is optional, but I like to trim the seam allowance to reduce some of the bulk. So we're just cutting the seam allowance in half. So now we're going to flip the lining up and in and give it a good press along the neckline. And now our lining is attached. Moving on to the skirt. If you do not plan on adding pockets to the skirt, all you have to do is put one of the skirt pieces down and then put the other skirt piece down right sides together and pin all down both of the side seams. And then you'll go ahead and sew those edges. But this is when I realized I wanted to add pockets. So I'm gonna draft a little pocket here. I'm just tracing my hand. And I'll add a little bit of extra fabric for seam allowance. And go ahead and cut 4 pockets out. This is optional, but I like to finish the raw edges to prevent them from fraying. So you can use a zigzag stitch or a serger. Here are my 4 pockets, all serged. You should have 2 sets of identical pockets. Let's place them onto the skirt. I'm measuring down 4.5 inches from the top of the skirt, and I'll make a mark there. I'll do the same thing to the other side, and that is where we will place the pocket. So when you're placing pockets, you see how this is kind of facing up? That's not natural because when you put your hand in, you want the pocket to be facing down. So make sure it's facing down, right sides together, and we're just gonna pin it right there along the pocket. And again, for the other side, don't face your pocket up, face it down, but wait, that's not the right pattern piece because it has to be right sides together. This is the right pattern piece. We'll go ahead and pin that. And now we'll do the same exact thing for the other skirt piece. We're just gonna sew right along where the pocket and the side seam are connected, starting and ending with a back stitch. Now, if you wanna finish your raw edges, you can do a zigzag stitch. I'm just gonna run this through my serger. I'm just serging the side seams on both skirt pieces. So now our pocket is attached. We're just gonna press it open. This is optional, but I like to sew a little seam here with the pocket open. This attaches the pocket to the seam allowance, and this helps the pockets lay a lot better. Now let's connect our skirt pieces. With the pocket out, we're gonna lay the skirt pieces right sides together, and we'll pin down the side seam around the pocket and down the rest of the side seam. I'll do the same thing for the other side of the skirt. And now we just need to sew down the side seam around the pocket and down the rest of the side seam on both sides. So here I am sewing the side seam. When I get to the pocket, I'm just gonna pivot. You know the drill, drop the needle down, pivot the fabric, and keep sewing. We'll sew all around the pocket, again, pivot, and sew the rest of the side seam. Press your seams nice and flat. If you did not add pockets, join us. This is where we're both picking back up. Now it's time to gather the waist of the skirt. This is super, super easy. I have a really good trick. We're using a straight stitch. Put the length as long as it will go. Keep the width at 0. Needle position in the middle, and move the tension as tight as it will go, up to a 9. And now when we sew, we are gonna hold tightly onto the thread. This is gonna feel really weird, but I promise it works. Also, pull on your thread tail and give yourself a lot of slack. Now I'm gonna start sewing around the waist. I'm sewing this at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And the most important thing is do not backstitch at the start or the end. And as you can see, the fabric is just gonna automatically start gathering because you're holding so tightly onto the thread. It's putting extra tension on and just automatically creating gathers. It is the best trick ever. We'll sew it all around, and when we get to the end, pull on the thread to give yourself a long thread tail and cut it. And now we just need to attach the bodice to the skirt. There are easy ways and there are harder ways to do this. For the easiest way, you could literally just put the skirt and the bodice pieces right sides together and sew it all around, which would connect them, but it would also leave the raw edges exposed on the inside of the garment, which doesn't look the most professional. So I'm going to show you an easy but little more difficult way to do it. So we're going to pull the lining away from the bodice, and then we're going to flip the bodice inside out. Move the little strap out of the way, and then we're going to place the skirt inside the bodice. So now they are right sides facing together. Make sure to line the side seam of the bodice with the side seam of the skirt and go ahead and pin it. Do the same thing for the other side. Make sure the side seams are matched up and pin them. And now we're just going to pin all the way around. This is the reason why we left long thread tails. We can gather it in or let some fabric out, however much you need, in order to make the bodice and the skirt fit together. So I had to gather mine in a little bit more to make them fit together. And now we'll sew it all around. I'm sewing this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And as I'm sewing, I'm just kind of making sure the gathers lay nicely and kind of flat as I'm sewing. And now our skirt and bodice are connected. But on the inside, they're not connected. So that is the last step here that we have to do. And again, there's an easy way and a hard way. So the easy way would be literally just fold this little raw edge in and sew it all around. But if we do that, you're gonna be able to see that stitch on the outside of the dress, which I don't like. So this is the little bit more difficult way, but still not too bad. We're gonna lift the lining up away from the bodice, and I'm gonna fold the top edge down by about 1/2 inch and press it all around. I'm also going to press the waist of the dress. I don't think I did that yet. And now I'm going to fold that lining down, and I'm just going to cover that seam of the skirt with the bodice lining. So you're just going to overlap it a little bit and pin it all around. Okay, so now we're going to flip it right side out, and all we need to do now is sew it along the ditch. This technique is called stitch in the ditch. That's the ditch right there. And we're gonna sew that all around, which will also catch that lining in the seam. So in order to do that, we're gonna pin the ditch all around. The pins are still on the inside, but we're gonna also pin the outside. Just pin that little ditch all around, and then once that's done, flip it back to the inside. And now we're gonna take all of those pins on the inside out. Once that's done, flip it back around, right side out, and now we can sew in the ditch. Start and end with a back stitch. We're just gonna sew right there in that ditch. And while we do this, it's gonna catch that lining and sew everything together with an invisible seam on the outside. When you get to the end, do a back stitch. And now all that's left to do is we need to hem the bottom of the dress. I ended up trying mine on, and I think I trimmed like 3 inches off. And I'm just folding it down twice by 1/2 inch and pressing it. And now we'll go ahead and sew that hem all around. And our dress is done. I love how this turned out. My husband says it's his favorite thing I've ever made, and I get so many compliments on this dress, not to toot my own horn, but I love it. I hope you learned a little something. If you made it to the end, pat yourself on the back, give this video a little like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave a comment. Let me know if you plan on making this dress. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!